said in the intro that I had the privilege of serving as an executive director for a multi-million-dollar 501c3. Well, the multi-million-dollar 501c3 was a community action agency located in Salisbury, North Carolina. And so today and in May, to commemorate that, May is Community Action Month. And so for those of you who are may have heard of community action or have been in and around community action, just know that community action has very storied history in our modern American history. Community actions are basically our nonprofit organizations that were more or less created by the Lyndon Johnson administration during the 1960s through the signing of the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. The real basis of this act is that it embodies a philosophy that low-income individuals can best identify the issues their communities face and develop solutions to resolve them. Across this country, we've got around 1,000 community action agencies, and they're a robust state and local force reaching children, families, and disabled, basically 99% of America's counties with life-changing services that create pathways to self-sufficiency. The model community action is basically equipping low-income citizens with the tools and potential for becoming self-sufficient. The structure of programming is unique. We have a lot of federal dollars that are involved, and they're used locally to offer specialized programming in communities. In many ways, when I would talk to folks when I was an ED in community action, I would say that community action has been somewhat of an incubator and an accelerator for a lot of the social justice programs that we see today. One large program that has a major impact in America's children is the program Head Start and Early Head Start. Back in the 1960s, these were started as experimental programs held where else? In community action agencies. Many of you in Charlotte may be familiar with Legal Aid of North Carolina. Well, that's a federally funded legal services program for the poor. Where was it incubated? When something called storefront legal services, where? In community action agencies. Community action agencies continue to provide workforce development solutions for communities, food banks to address food insecurity, and even the challenges of renewable energy in some other community action agencies. It's a very fascinating area, but ultimately it's to try to solve the common problem of poverty and getting to the roots of poverty and empowering low-income people to be a part of that solution and in fact lead that solution. And so today we're going to have Charlotte's own community action agency represented by its CEO, Nick Wharton. Before we were going to go do a spiel, Nick was kind enough to share a really nice video, and I'm going to share this video with you as well, because I think sometimes they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, maybe picture, video, and audio is worth 1,000,000 words, right? So let's go ahead and play this video.
Poverty rate in our city has grown exponentially, and so we all have to do things differently and operate outside the box.
Resources that have been provided from the state and local level as well as federal level. The funding will allow an agency like the Charlotte Area Fund to create opportunities and expand on the opportunities that we currently have with the programs that we offer.
We have reentry programs for those who are incarcerated. We have child care service support for those who are just working every day trying to make it, right? There are a lot of things happening with this agency. We are really now prepared to really be an important factor. We've renovated our location here, and that's really very nice. We have a wonderful group of individuals, politicians, and other stakeholders who came.
I'm going to work the annual Charlotte Area Fund graduation. Today we're going to celebrate because this is a great accomplishment what they did. Believe that you can. Believe that you can do all things through Christ who will give you strength. Believe you can
also had a great celebration, really, of really American democracy. We had 10 Latino Americans that came through our English as a second language class, and they have gotten their citizenship. This is a community action week, and we're excited to have this free health care fair, dental care, optical care, cardiologists, immunizations, a whole range of screenings, really, to create a well. I'm so excited to be here.
Partnership that Charlotte Area Fund has in the community, and the expanding partnership that they're building is absolutely essential in helping bridge and overcome that divide between the haves and the have-nots, between those that are comfortable and those that one small health crisis put them in the deepest throes of poverty, of which they may never be able to recover. It's these partnerships that they're building here are so important.
MECED's Career Pathways program provides opportunities, internships. We remove obstacles to success for young kids like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. We started noticing that so many of them, their money goes back. They get their internship paychecks, and they're paying the electric bill in their house. They're paying for housing. They're paying for food for their family. Not that I'm happy they're able to do that. What would it be like if we could remove all of those burdens from a young person selling your jobs to take care of your future? We don't have any resources to help their families. So Nick and I started talking about what would it be like if we collaborated, Charlotte Area Fund and MECED. We could target some of the same families, give them that support through the Charlotte Area Fund, while we're providing the internships and the support and training for the students. That's a cool thing.
The gathering today is a reflection on what the Charlotte Area Fund has meant for so many years. But it's also a reminder that fighting poverty is difficult, that it takes partnerships, it takes creativity, it takes endurance, perseverance. It's not easy. In my 40 years of working on behalf of this program, has there been more bipartisan support in Congress for what you do?
Thank you. Thank you so much. All the vendors out here and stuff is much appreciated by me, at least, and I'm sure it is by other people as well. And I'm very happy with the results that I had after my health screening, after changing my lifestyle.
I'm in the Charlotte Area Fund because I belong to the program in 55 and over. And when they told me that they was having a health fair, I was real excited. The whole group was real excited. So that's why we're here. That's why we're enjoying everything.
So, I mean, you can't get any better than that. So what's next is that we are really broadening our relationship across the county. And so we all have to do things differently. You got to operate outside the box. So that's what we're doing.
All right. Well, that was a great intro to Charlotte Area Fund. So everybody, let's just welcome Nick Wharton, CEO of Charlotte Area Fund, to today's leadership series. Hey, Nick.
How are you? Thank you for having me. I'm
fantastic video. So like I told you, I crib a question from a friend of the show, Pat McDowell, every episode, and I always make a plug for his podcast for those involved in nonprofit leadership, is Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership podcast on iTunes and all that good stuff. But he always asks this question of his guests, and I always want to ask my guests is, Nick, what was your path to nonprofit leadership? Just to kind of find out how you got the Charlotte Area Fund.
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in New York City, Brooklyn and Queens. And I grew up very poor in a working class neighborhood of Cambridge Heights, Queens, and lived somewhat in Brooklyn as well. So early on in my life, I was really exposed, right, to what it meant to be in a poor neighborhood. Come from a family that had not had a lot of resources. And, you know, thanks be to God, there have been all kinds of individuals around me and support systems, right, that helped me to kind of move on and get a quality education. My mother raised us 3 boys. We had a sister as well from my father's additional relationship. But we witnessed some things as a young person that perhaps no young person should have to witness. And so, you know, again, thanks be to God, through support systems and role models. I was an athlete. I was able to in some ways shield myself. Others really got my back, if you will, and pushed me forward. I was able to get a quality education, been running initiatives and academic support systems, access and equity systems all my life, really helping to increase diversity and inclusion. In the private sector, also did a lot of diversity work with companies. But more importantly, we arrived down in Charlotte in 2003. Mm-hmm. And it was a great transition from upstate New York. And in fact, my first role here in Charlotte was at Wachovia Bank as a diversity, strategic diversity specialist, helping leaders to better understand how to look at talent, diverse talent, in a fresh and innovative way to make sure that they can add value to the bottom line of then Wachovia Bank. So a little bit after the downturn, I left the bank and became the first diversity officer at Charlotte Latin School. So given all of my background and certainly working at Charlotte Latin School, having an opportunity to see the sort of how the 1%ers live, let's say, in Charlotte, gave me an important glimpse into Charlotte. Perhaps one that others maybe read about, but don't always have a chance to be exposed to. And so at the same time, I became a board member at the Urban League of Central Carolinas. And eventually I transitioned to the chief operating officer there. And then of course I was the interim president there. So you see, I had a really good glimpse into two sides of what Charlotte is, right? Mm-hmm. And it really was a good kind of culmination of all the work I've done helping folk get access to opportunities. And now I'm here, the president and CEO of the Charlotte Area Fund, which quite frankly, as you mentioned, Rocky, it is in fact the oldest federal anti-poverty initiative in the country. You mentioned there was 1,000 agencies. Was 1,000 agencies around the country. There are 34 in North Carolina. I chair the Council of Executive Directors. And these are hardworking executive directors and programs staff that are really working, just deliberately, right, and intentionally with folk who are living on the margins prior to the pandemic, right? And so over this period, last March, all of our jobs got, infinitesimally harder, right? And so we really got engaged. We were fortunate enough. And let me just make this point. It's a very important one. As Rocky mentioned, there was 1,000 agencies. So we're also in 95% of the nation's counties. And what that means is that, and you heard the gentleman, David Bradley, the white gentleman, speaking in the video. He's the national lobbyist for community action on Capitol Hill. And when he mentioned this notion of bipartisanship, poverty, the real face of poverty doesn't exactly look like you and I. It's actually very white in this country as well. And so community action receives tremendous support on both sides of the political aisle because it's in 95% of the nation's counties, right? And poverty cuts across, so many dynamics, right? So when we think about our experience, early on during the pandemic, David Bradley and the lobbying arm of community action was able to encourage and persuade the Congress to initiate $1 billion in CARES funding for the 1,000 agencies across the country. $26 million came to North Carolina, $1.9 million came to our agency. Community action agencies, their budgets are driven by the percentage of poverty in those counties, right? So we got a significant share of those dollars, right? Because the sense of that the impact would be great here, and it was, and it continues to be. So over this period, quite frankly, we've served probably about 700 individuals and about 1,500, families, right? Trying to provide rental assistance support, utility support. We didn't close our doors during this entire period. We worked virtually, as did most community actions across the country, because this times of crisis is when we go into action, quite frankly. And so we provided those kind of services, job training services for those who, in spite of it all, still want to work through this dilemma and create a better life for themselves. We provided job training virtually for those, blend of virtual and in-person training. We helped, first responders with transportation getting to work during this process. right? We provided PPE. We provided all kinds of food insecurity. We provided food for, we have a senior empowerment program. We provided mental health, telehealth counseling to their homes, made sure they had food in their homes. So we had a whole array of services that we still are very much engaged in, that we feel really, really excited about, because in spite of it all, we've been able to really meet clients' needs in ways that, quite frankly, we didn't think were possible either, because we learned to work far more efficiently, right, to make sure that clients got their needs met. And that's just a few of the services where we'll get deeply into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, so like I told you before you got come on the show, you know, I said this, our crowd and the folks that will end up watching this video, they're not all in the nonprofit sector, which I think is refreshing for those of us who've been in the nonprofit sector. You do a lot of preaching to the choir. Is many folks here may be familiar with Charlotte Area Fund, may not be, but maybe it's a great opportunity. You've talked a lot about what is offered there, but maybe for the non-nonprofit person, you know, how would you explain community action and Charlotte Area Fund, though? Because again, most of the folks who are here are living in Charlotte and would maybe like to know more about the organization.
Well, you know, you did an exquisite job explaining what community action is, right? So as we are the Charlotte Area Fund, and we have been in this county really for over 50 years. In fact, you know, this agency was established in 1963 and not 1964, when the Economic Opportunity Act was signed to the legislation by the then President Lyndon Baines Johnson. So that makes us one of a handful of the earliest community action agencies in the nation. And so if we kind of look at it, so we think back about how poverty was that drove the war on poverty. There weren't all these nonprofits, you know, focused on poverty. There were very few, right? In fact, Charlotte Area Fund was really this sort of, you know, we were really the agency, because poverty required federal intervention. It wasn't just a matter of, you know, charity and goodwill, right? Because we also had overlaid with that was a deeply racial caste system that we know all too well in the South, as well as in the North, that really locked people out of opportunity. And so we had a sort of pandemic then, one of race and poverty in the 60s, right? And so community action was formed, right? As Lyndon Johnson said, really, as a federal intervention into poverty all over the country. So we have maintained all those years. And of course, poverty has deepened. We have hundreds of nonprofits in Charlotte, all working concertedly in different aspects to really, you know, change the trajectory of people's lives. And so our agency, as Rocky mentioned, the structure of our agency is a little different than others. As you mentioned, you know, part of the philosophy of community action is that we really want to get those impacted by poverty involved in their own solutions, right? So we have what's called a tripartite board of directors, which is composed of 1/3, you know, elected officials representing, right, county commission, maybe the mayor's office. We have 1/3 private citizens who just have a real interest in solving these problems. And most critical, we have those who represent low wealth communities on the board, right? And so it's called maximum feasible participation. The idea that the board, right, there would be a true representation of those interests, right, that are interested in changing the trajectory of poverty. And so that kind of drives, so every year we have a needs assessment that gives us some, you know, sort of due north perspective in terms of what are the issues we're going to focus on. So this particular agency focuses on workforce development, case management, you know, all kind of nutrition assistance, I'll say. We have a senior empowerment program. But so our lens says, you know, folk need to have living wage jobs, right? Jobs that can compete in an ever-changing marketplace. And we realize that one area that is underserved, and there's wide agreement across the nation, everybody is not going to get a college education. I worked in several colleges and universities leading very well-known academic and retention and scholarship programs. So I know what success is like to provide young people a chance to all the way get to their PhD. I've been there, I've worked those programs. Right now, across this nation, we see this middle skill box where there are lots of opportunities for those without a college degree, but with special certification to enter into areas that can provide a more than a living wage job. So the trades, obviously, are a space that has been underutilized for a lot of reasons. They have been, in many cases, those areas have been locked out. Minority folk have been locked out of those opportunities. But that industry, whether it's electricians, HVAC, you go down the line, those individuals are aging out. But there hasn't been much focus on investing in the pipeline to replace, and the need is great. So we have an HVAC certification program. We have a 95% EPA certification pass rate. Those folk have a 95% chance of getting a job making $18 to $25 an hour, right? It's a 3-month training program. We have a broadband fiber optics training program, and as a telecom role, these individuals get 2 national certifications in premise cabling and fiber splicing. They are the people who work for Spectrum that become wire homes. They're also in audio. They're also in, I'm sorry, but basically it is a high-tech area that is solar. They're also the technicians who work in solar. So then we have an electrician engineering certification. We have a number of med tech fields, whether it's phlebotomy rather, or other CNA1, CNA2. Tomorrow, excitingly, we have our first North Carolina Department of Transportation Highway Construction Academy graduating within the Mecklenburg County jails.
So that's good.
So we have the head of David Howard, Charlotte's son, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Transportation. He'll be speaking to these newly minted, 4-week academy graduates. And so we're excited about that. They'll get several certifications, and then they'll also be eligible for their CDL license as well as heavy equipment license. And we'll also provide 2 to 3 months of housing, right, as they transition. And then there's other wraparound support that we're planning to provide.
So that sounds really good. So I think that what I'm hearing here, and again, and I think for the audience, is that there's a lot of not exactly college level, assistance, but there are certifications, as you've mentioned, that lead you towards greater self-sufficiency. And so my question here, and I kind of know the answer, but I think that I want you to tell the answer is, are there any charges to any of the participants?
No. So in this recent climate we're in, normally our eligibility standard is for those at 125% of federal poverty and below. Through this pandemic, our CARES resources allowed us to open that window to 200% of federal poverty. Therefore, we have, and you've read a lot about this, there's so many more new people with degrees, who are unemployed, no fault of their own, and they've fallen within that poverty guideline. So we're supporting them. Services are free, but we're supporting them at recreating their careers. So we have virtual training with a company we've contracted with. And so there are those getting their HR certifications, right? There are those getting different technical coding certifications. These folks have degrees. Some have master's degrees, right? So the new class of the poor right now, right, has shifted, right? And so we have kind of broadened our network really to really help a great deal of folk, quite frankly. We also have some partnerships too, Rocky, that might be interesting for the audience to hear.
No, absolutely.
So a couple things. We provide direct services to families, really. We also provide support to communities, right? And we have lots of partners we work with. You saw in the video, MEC Ed is a program
Yeah, that video sort of had a who's who of Charlotte in there. I mean, if you know Charlotte a little bit, you start to pick up, hey, that's Dorothy Counts. I mean, you start to pick up on, some famous, Charlotte, and some very famous people in there. So you
thank you for noting that. But they're famous because they serve. These are all servant leaders as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we just partnered with the Park Church, for instance. They were had a campaign on to raise something like $189,000 for a mobile vehicle unit that would serve the poor. It would be a unit that would provide showers, wash clothes, have area for counseling in the vehicle, and this vehicle would travel around the community, rather county, serving the needs of the poor. So we're partnering with them. We've offered up resources to help them on their financial journey to get this vehicle up and running. So that's a beautiful thing. MECED is another organization, as you heard him, Ross Daniels talk about. They work with young people. We partnered with them to work with those parents because they didn't have service for the parents. So we partnered with them, right? Goodwill, they have a residential construction program. We partnered with them during this pandemic to provide virtual training in residential construction, right? So we've got a number of graduates coming through that program too. So I tell you, we have, maybe you've heard of Digital Navigators, right? It's a program that Henry Rock has crafted. Henry, right? Yeah. So an incredible program where he's helping those who are previously incarcerated develop, computer and technical skills, right? So they could be what he called geek squads in the hood, individuals from the community, right? That would help with closing the digital divide. So he trains them. We pay their salaries while they're in the job. Great partnership.
So right? It sounds like from the partner standpoint, because where I am, obviously, I work with a lot of various nonprofits, on the various scales, from the startup to, a nonprofits that are already kind of functioning. You kind of level like Charlotte Area Fund or something like that. Right. But I think, all nonprofits tend to operate in silos in some respects. We kind of get burrowed into our own kind of program, what our board is thinking, what our stakeholders are thinking. And what I like and what, it sounds like, particularly with some of the added funding and some of the creative, what I've liked about Charlotte Area Fund is that you've thought outside the box of the typical, like some of the funding is from the community services block grant money. It comes from the feds through Raleigh, right? And, they have, and I think many of the action agencies have classically used that money for workforce development, right? I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, that's kind of, but then this idea, and I think this is what, for those of you in the audience who are part of nonprofits, no nonprofits, also those nonprofits who are looking to do something innovative, but need maybe a little extra oomph or a partner. I know that from what you're saying, Nick, is that that Charlotte Area Fund is willing to have a conversation with any group that is sort of trying to address the systemic roots of poverty. And that you could very well, whether it's a technical assistance or possibly financial assistance, in some way, kind of make them ambassadors of some sort for Charlotte Area Fund, for them to kind of do their mission, as long as obviously aligns with the anti-poverty mission of Charlotte Area Fund.
That's well said. We really are about shared outcomes. Now let me just be real clear. As a community action agency, a federally supported community action agency, our budgets are not extraordinary, right? However, unlike some of my colleagues who have nonprofits that is independent, there is a sense that because, we don't have to sort of hunt to eat for our core budget, right? We can operate a little different, right? Now, all things being equal, certainly in this climate, federal dollars and community action agencies are seen as an organization nationally, right, that can get in and help get at the root of problems. But it happens through collaboration. So by virtue of community action, by its very nature, it is collaborative. And I know that nonprofits oftentimes operate in silos, as you said, Rocky, because you're just fighting to survive. I get it, and so what we try to do is really help build even capacity of organizations, to the degree that we can, right? But it's really all about shared outcomes. It's not always easy to partner. We need very carefully crafted memos of understanding, right, that align with our policies and our compliance issues, really, right? And it's got to focus on those that are either 125% of federal poverty pre-pandemic, now it's 200%, given the period we have. And, you know, we have to have all kinds of reporting information in order for these partnerships to work. But essentially, you know, you hit it on the head, Rocky. It's about collaboration. None of us do this alone. I'll give you an example. Heal Charlotte, they just received tremendous news in the, I think Les Halt did a great story on Heal Charlotte, and Greg Jackson doing a wonderful job in his home program, working with those who are homeless and getting them in hotels and providing them support. So we were one of the earlier, I think, organizations that provided significant dollars last year, right, to support some of that work. I'm not saying that to suggest we should get any credit. I'm just saying how collaboration happens. We don't need to be, we're not running the cameras for publicity, but the reality is that, you know, it's important that we kind of support organizations that we can see a shared outcome, you know, because at the end of the day, it's about serving, you know, families in need. And if you're eligible for our program, your entire family is eligible for services. So if you were in a circumstance and your family income is X, you have this many children in your family, all your children are eligible for the services that we might be able to provide, which could be many, depending on the situation. We provided, you know, dental work for family members. We've done a whole range of things because we have that kind of bandwidth. If we have the resources, we have the thought leadership to make things happen for families.
Yeah, I think, well, earlier you had mentioned sort of like the pandemic before there was the pandemic. We're talking about issues of racial inequality and obviously poverty and income inequality. And I mean, and most of you who are in the audience here who've been kind of following Charlotte, you know, prior to obviously COVID, one of the biggest news stories, which I think is still a huge news story, but it's still always kind of hovering over Charlotte as sort of a cloud, really, is the Chatty Study, right? Remember the study that said that Charlotte was what, 50 out of 50 out of the most industrial or most financed cities in America. And I know that there was a lot of conversation, as kind of like the time I was in the Community Action Agency, about the study. And then, you know, I think they had a Leading on Opportunity task force. I think there was a lot of different meetings. I know there was a book club of sorts going around and talking about the Color of Law book. Where is Charlotte Area Fund as sort of part of the sort of reaction or sort of to the how it addressing to the Chatty Study? Because there's no way you cannot not be part of the solution here.
Yeah. Well, let me just start with the kind of so-called end in mind. So we were one of the 50 inaugural opportunity leaders that the Foundation of Carolinas identified, right, as agencies and organizations, you know, vested in efforts, right, to change that study around. And as you said, we were identified as 50th out of 50 major U.S. urban cities, right, for being least favorable to helping poor people, right, get out of poverty. So in some ways, when you think about the United States, you know, the global power that we are, you know, it is and continues to be extraordinarily embarrassing, right, that's the place we're in. As a study unfolded, we begin to see that the lowest 10 cities are in the South, right? And we kind of unpacked some of that as well. We see racial inequities, right? That is a sort of theme throughout it all, whether it's housing, education, healthcare. We had this conversation about social determinants of health, being banked, you know, financial literacy, access to loans. All of these factors have a clear stream, right, of racial inequity, structural inequality, institutional racism baked in. Now, what's fascinating in some ways about Charlotte is that, you know, some years ago, around prior to that study, there was a study that talked about philanthropy. Like the
Mhm.
name of the study escapes me, but the study revealed that while Charlotte is one of the rated extremely high in philanthropic giving, it rated very low in cross-cultural trust.
Hmm.
So the assumption one could, conclude is that this is a city that may not have a problem writing a check,
Mm-hmm.
for services, to help those less fortunate, but to get proximate to the problem, to develop more sustainable relationships with people who are different. That's another matter, right? And so we see that in a sort of a politeness, a sort of air of, no bleach, no blot, this whole notion that by giving, to the poor, it makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, early on in the pandemic, when we began to see how those who, ethnic and racial minority folk were impacted most serious by the virus, and still it continues, who were also essential workers, right? So I always say, when I got in this business in Charlotte, it became real clear that folk when we talk about this study, people didn't have quite an understanding of it because they live in gated communities. They may drive from South Charlotte uptown. They don't see poverty, and so it's out of sight, out of mind.
They started seeing the tent cities, and maybe they started to feel
right. It's a sort of existential kind of thought that they can't touch and feel it. But when it became clear that the baggage handlers at Harris Teeter, the postal workers, right, those people who those other people coming in contact with, right, at a much more personal level, the awareness of this virus and how it can impact everybody, how we're now all in this together, it began to make people think a little bit more, right? Because we were working with those essential workers, right? Because they didn't have the luxury as we're doing now, perhaps sit in our homes and talk to each other through these boxes. They had to work, right? So we tried to provide them with PPE. We tried to provide them with resources for transportation. We had one family whose car broke down. We paid like $700. I'm just saying they had a lot of needs. They didn't have the luxury, right, of being at home unless that business was shut down. And of course, when it shut down, we also provided, income stabilization. For those families, right? But the point is, across that whole line, it just reveals the deep work around institutional racism, right? That has to be dismantled. And so there appears to be right now, many organizations, corporations, nonprofits, and foundations are taking a hard and very rigorous look at themselves to really address the racial inequities in their organizations. And those take a long time to do, but I think the journey in a sense has begun. The backlash is also in effect. But we don't have a choice. We think about the number of 18-year-olds right now in this country, right? Who are going to inherit the country, mostly Black and brown children. So you look to the future, it is clear who's going to be paying retirement. The retirement bills, for many others, right? So, but yet they're underprepared, ill-equipped to effectively participate in this economy, through jobs, through wealth creation. So there's a lot of work that has to be done and repaired.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, there's a lot of things going on in Charlotte, right? There's a big hubbub about the comprehensive plan, the 2040 plan that's been out there. Who would have thought that one of the hottest topics in Charlotte would be what normally, many years ago, just be a very stale planning document, bandied about by, planning, professionals. I mean, we're actually kind of seeing some issues in the art sphere, with issues with art funding and who gets what, and I think ultimately what I hear you saying is that obviously poverty, like I think even the Bible says you always have the poor, right? The poverty cuts across, but it does sound like, and from hearing from you, is that because of the disparities that hit people different, hit communities because of generational poverty and Jim Crow and the whole, 40 acres and a mule swindle that happened many number of years ago, that poverty hits, pockets of people harder than others, and I think that kind of recognition, it sounds like from what you and Charlotte Area Fund and I've seen it even within community action, is that becoming more conscious of just the racial dynamics, racial disparities within poverty. Because you can have poor people. I mean, poor people you can pull out someone's checkbook, but then of course there is the, again, there's the structural components as well. And so I guess, I don't want to necessarily make the episode about the dourness of,
let me put this in context. This is the struggle. Right? Mm-hmm. This is the struggle. I mean, we've got to be realistic. As much as work that's going on that's trying to provide access, even the American Rescue Plan and the robustness of what that is claiming to do. The goals and objectives of that are pretty ambitious, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
a lot of money, $3 trillion.
And seen that kind of activity in 50 years, right, probably in this country.
Well, that's the point. Since the war on poverty, there hasn't been that kind of marshaling, right, of federal dollars. The idea that for some years now, we've been kind of inundated with the idea that, get the government out of our lives, this whole hating the government, but in actuality, right, the government can do good things and has done good things. If it wasn't for government intervention, right, not only in the South, but across the country, right, African-American folk, and on both sides, because let's be clear, it's government intervention that created a lot of the structural inequalities,
right, that
blocked, African-Americans and others out, right? And so it makes sense that this government intervention to dismantle that, mm-hmm, right, is also essential. So it's never, to me, in my world, and many the world of nonprofits, it's never just, hot, cold. It mm-hmm is the work, basically, and we just have to stay, ambitious, stay focused, right? Right now we're seeing, retrenchment on voting rights, right? I mean, that's real. I mean, that's very real. When the Supreme Court says that, North Carolina, policies and practices were surgically discriminated against, black folk in the state, and that's serious stuff. And we can just see what's happening across the country. And so we have to just be, truth to power, and accept where we are and move through it. We got to advocate for, social justice, right? Mm-hmm. And we've got to really work at trying to make sure families, right, are intact and are growing and prospering. And that's what we see in the Charlotte Area Fund. So, notwithstanding what we're dealing with, we're very positive about. When you see families, who gotten a job, I see young people, get on their feet, get an HVAC certification, decide to marry this girl they've been dating for however, they got 2 children. They feel a little bit more whole. They want to marry this woman. I mean, you got to feel good about that, right? So there's a lot of wonderful success stories, but we need them at the systems level too.
Yeah, no, I think that's, when I used to teach at a law school, right, I had many millennials and Gen Z students, and, many of them obviously looking to become attorneys, obviously, if you go to law school, but, you could hear, among the students about debt, you could hear them talking about, well, I'm going to leave Charlotte Law with God knows how much debt, I left undergrad before I even got to the law school and in a mountain load of debt, and the thing is, I'm 25 years removed from college. So I'm thinking, oh, I had a lot of debt. No, I didn't have a lot of debt. Not like these kids have debt. And I think that, when you're talking about kind of, how to help provide, structural assistance to like ensuring families. I mean, a lot of these young people are holding off on getting married, holding off on having children. And what can, I think a society can't necessarily subsist if we're going to just have, a whole bunch of 30 and 40-year-old childless people, kind of walking around.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point that I think one of the underlying things, and this is something I took away from my time at the community action agency, because I came into community action agency sort of like professional managerial class lawyer with X amount of letters after my last name. And I came through it and I was realizing, you know, number one, a job has dignity, number one, and two,
Right.
you know, that if you can not just make a living wage, but make a wage that you can save, that you can buy a house and such, that's a good job. That's a good career. And I think that there might be some pressures that we're forcing a lot of youth who may not, their aptitudes may not necessarily be led to the liberal arts or the sciences or to the STEM, but really get your hands into like, I mean, you know, how much of like, you know, you call your HVAC person, I mean, you're getting the same bills you get from a lawyer. I'm gonna tell you that, you know, so,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
you know, is that it's great to hear that. And it's something you can share the audience is that if you know somebody and you, or maybe you are that somebody, why am I assuming something here is
Right.
that there is a resource paid by the federal government to allow you an ability to move from one social status to another, right? And the Charlotte Area Fund can help you with that. If you're looking, again, it sounds like you even have HR certification going through there.
That's correct.
That's, I mean,
Right.
so, I mean, that right therein is like a bump in pay. I mean, if you're just an HR
That's the
specialist
point.
and you
That's
get up
the point.
to HR director level, that's
Right.
that's like that
Yeah.
you're in the C-suite at that point.
Yeah.
You know,
We're retooling, helping folks to retool themselves in this climate.
Yeah.
That's
So-
really, really important. And
Yeah.
private and public partnerships
Mhm.
are also very critical. We were fortunate enough for IKEA Corporation to award us a $1.1 million unrestricted grant.
That's insane. That's amazing. So,
And first time in community action.
so
in the
is
nation.
all the Charlotte Area Fund have like furniture that no one can pronounce?
No, actually, that's a great point. That's I got to think about that. No, we don't. You know, we really don't. But one of the things that IKEA thought they were doing, which was pretty smart, in the 26 markets across the country in which they're doing
Mhm.
business, they, as other big box organizations, had to furlough workers, right?
Yeah.
Slow down. And in those markets where those furloughed workers received unemployment benefits from those states,
Mhm.
they thought to reimburse those states by giving a one-time donation to one nonprofit in each state. The governor, Roy Cooper, recommended Charlotte Area Fund be that agency.
Congratulations.
So that was a huge endorsement. So what did that do for us? And Rocky, you know this because you were in community action, right? Oftentimes, all of our programs work on a 30-day reimbursement, 30, 60-day
Yeah.
reimbursement of expenses, right? And while we had significant allocation from the state because of the population of poverty we have in the county, we weren't able to access all of our resources because we didn't have any unrestricted dollars.
Base. I will keep an eye out for that because I think that connecting in with Karen and the work that she's doing,
So
where the commonalities are, makes a lot of sense. So that we're not, you know, it seems crazy to go down two separate paths: trauma-informed care for everyone, and
are we in the same conversation? Oh, anyway. So the bottom line is that we were able to partner.
That's
right?
live TV for you.
It's a beautiful thing. We were able to partner and also, you know, draw down resources and do more into the community, right?
Yeah.
Training programs, partnerships, right? In a much more budgetarily efficient way because of those resources. And also stabilize gaps in our organization for the foreseeable future if we're wise.
No, I think, you know, number one, you know, I think everyone, and we're going to get to the question and answer period real soon, is, you know, Charlotte Area Fund, again, it is a 501c3, even though it is federally funded. You know, if you do believe in the mission, you know, you can donate on their website and get a tax deduction just like any other private charity. But I'd also say, you know, for those of you who really care about, you know, the issue of poverty, and I don't know, Nick may be able to kind of give you a heads up when, because I know this was an issue when I was running Salisbury Rowan, is the board, right? You know, there's some turnover, and it's always, particularly with a larger board, you know, because I think community action agencies, because of the tripartite, you know, demands, right? You have to have a usually larger than average board of directors than you have in a typical nonprofit. And for those of you who really do care about the issue poverty, maybe reach out to Nick and say, let me know when there might be an opportunity on the board of directors or something like that, because you got to have people who really care, you know, because here's the thing. You got 1/3 usually elected officials who may have a designee, may not. But remember, these folks have bigger fish to fry. In particular, if they're coming from the city of Charlotte or the county, they got real big fish to fry that sitting on a board may not, I mean, they will obviously serve, but it may not be like 40th on their list of priorities. And then obviously we have, you know, folks who we're training and getting them involved. But I think it's going to be real key for those that other third you know, from the private sector. There's a huge role for you to play in a community action agency. And so to whatever extent that, you know, because I know this was the same thing I would tell folks, is that they said, well, you know, I'm not an elected official. You don't have to be, you know, and I'm not from a low income community. I said that, again, they need help. There's folks that can help kind of make glue to a community action agency board. And so to that extent, you know, obviously dollars is nice, but, you know, just that sort of service as well. I kind of, you know, and I told you, anybody who comes on the show, I make the shameless plug, you know, but it's not shameless in the sense that I believe in every organization that shows up on the Leadership Series. So it's not, I don't, you know, I don't mind telling you that these are organizations that are deserving of your support, because they are, and particularly a community action agency, which is going to the root of a lot of our problem, which is poverty. I mean, that is if you meet up with a community action agency, they don't mention poverty in the first, I don't know, 20 words that they're saying. Yeah.
If I can just say this, Rocky. So today and tomorrow, our statewide conference is going on. As I mentioned before, I chair the council for the 34 agencies across the state, right? And they're having very intense and intentional conversations about programming around racial equity, around a number of initiatives they have going on, right? But they're front line. They're still dealing with issues of food insecurity. You know, we've got community action agencies that are still dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane.
Wow.
You know, and so they still are really providing, you know, the sort of bare necessities for families. But what I will tell you though is that in July 27th or so, we're planning a very large pop-up. So it'll be a statewide initiative that we'll hear. We'll talk more about it at a later date. But we got a number of partners, and we're providing all kinds of services and support for families, from food to materials to obviously PPE will still be an important factor. Vaccinations. We've got a number of things that will be rolling out in the later part of July, and I think it'll be quite interesting for families who really need it. I mean, you know, we're all on these tubes, and we're in our situations, and we're relatively comfortable. But there are folk who, you know, they're at the ground zero, and they're hurting, notwithstanding what this nice, comfortable conversation appears like. There are folk at the front line, and our clients, our staff are talking with them on a daily basis. So that's kind of like where we are. Good to see Mike Duval here on the call. That was good to see you, man. Nice hat, man. I'm feeling the hat. It's all about the hat, man.
You know, us men don't have many accessories, brother. So we gotta go with what we got. Mine is hats.
Yeah, you working it out, man. Yeah. So thanks for joining. Any questions anybody have?
Yeah. This is the time, you know, again, we got the man right here, CEO.
I'm one of the men.
Area Fund, and you know, again, if you got a question about the agency itself, I mean, poverty in Charlotte. This is the anti-poverty agency of Charlotte. So you got them right here. Ask your question.
That's awfully kind of you to say, you know, but certainly you said the point I wanted to make to you earlier is that there's a workforce providers council that I'm a part of, and there's a number of leaders on that group that are all on the front line providing various services, right? Particularly around, you know, professional and workforce development, getting folk skilled up, right, for living wage jobs. And at some point, it'd be great to get that group, or something you can do, Rocky, get that group involved. Anyway, just need to say that. But any questions anybody has, or any exchange, I don't know, comments you want to make based on what I've shared? Or just say, you know, this is a terrible conversation. That they're right too.
Yeah, and for those of you who enjoyed this conversation, this will be going up on the Holland Chandler Leadership YouTube page, and in the next day or two. So Nick, obviously get a link for that, share it with your board, let them know that you're preaching to the people about anti-poverty and that you're letting them know. Before we cut today, I mean, any other comments out there, or you have any closing words that you'd like to share with us, Nick?
Well, I'll say thank you to Rocky for inviting me. It's interesting, you don't always get, invited to have conversations. We have such a ambitious cheerleader that runs out in front of you and kind of lays out the groundwork for you. But Rocky has been the executive director of Salisbury Rowing Community Action. So he has been sort of bitten really by the community action sort of bug, and I'll just bring credit to the other 34 community action agencies in the state, who quite frankly do their work in almost complete obscurity. Folk barely know who they are. If you're in those counties, oftentimes those counties are low resource counties. Charlotte is a place of plentiful resources, but you get out to these other counties and you see that the resources they simply don't have. And I know that my colleagues are working really, really, really hard. They're actually really big dogs in their community. They're very prominent figures, because of some of the services they're providing are absolutely essential services. Here, we kind of think about the world a little differently, but so I have great admiration for the work that they do. So I'll just kind of throw some shade on any of the community act, whether it's Salisbury, Rowan, Needs program up in the Raleigh-Durham area. There's so many of them, right?
Get out the wages.
Can't forget about wages over in Greensboro, because if Benita's watching this, I mean, she's brutal, So yeah, that's
out to Coastal Carolina as well. Carolina. I'll be visiting Wilmington down there later this month, do a little Head Start training for them. So shout out to Katissa and good folks at at Community Action.
Yeah, but it's an interesting movement. I'm so impressed by the work that they do, and like I said, in obscurity, people don't know they're doing it.
All right.
Thank you for this opportunity, Rock. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks. And again, remember, this is Community Action Month.
Right.
May is it's a big month for a lot of different communities, but it's no different for Community Action. And on behalf of Holland Chandler, my boss Shannon Hames, and the leadership series, I just want to thank you for showing up in the middle of your week to join us for a rousing conversation, and we'll be back next time. So hang in there.
Thank you.
Talk to you later. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. You be well. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, Nick.
Thank you,
everybody.
Okay.